Hello everyone, and welcome to my presentation on how to migrate a Kendo UI Builder project to a project that only uses Angular and Kendo components. For today, first we will do a short introduction into what is Kendo UI Builder and its history. Then go into a bit of reasoning into why do such a migration. We will look at the migration plan, which will consist of two big phases: to refactor and remove current resources that are used by the framework, and then to upgrade the Angular version. At the end, we will look what features Angular offers in the latest releases, and the next steps that you can now take that you have an updated project. My name is George Ene. I work at Wayfare. Wayfare is a professional software services provider from Romania. I worked on open-edge applications and web applications with Angular. I worked in Angular projects that use the Kendo component library, some that did not use the Kendo component library, and some that use the framework that we will talk about today, Kendo UI Builder. What is Kendo UI Builder? It is a rapid application development framework created by Progress. The framework generates an Angular project with the Kendo component library as a major dependency. It has a view designer, a code generator, and build and serve features, which we will show briefly soon. An important detail about the framework is that it is not updated for a while now, and the generated project is an Angular 5 project. The framework was popular for a while in a modernization of Progress applications. Its big draw is and was that you can ship functionality pretty fast, especially create, update, delete functionality, for example, a table and a form for a table. For this exact reason, we also use it internally at Wayfare in training programs. Our trainings are usually focused on open-edge, but we still want trainees to ship a small product at the end of the project, and this small product to have a web UI. So this framework came in handy for this, as trainees can focus on open-edge, but they still can create a web front end without much knowledge of the web or going too deep into Angular. This is the UI of the framework for people that are not familiar with it. So you can create a project in this interface. You can create new Angular components. You can drag and drop predefined components into Angular views, and you can do other functions like start development server, build your project, and so on. As I've said, we use this at Wayfare in training programs, and in one of our trainings, we decided to continue with one of the projects created and to invest more into it. But as the project grew in functionality and as more people onboarded, we realized we need to get rid of Kendo UI Builder, as it was more in the way than helpful. A short preview of the application in case that is now an Angular 11 application, and that is was a project that started with Kendo UI Builder and an Angular 5 application. It is a small planning application designed for schools to make their schedule for teacher and classes. You probably can recognize the standard Kendo UI Builder layout, so that is still in place. Now the project is built using Angular 11 and Kendo components, but that does not use the framework anymore. Okay, why would you migrate a project if you have a project? Why would you migrate away from the framework? As stated, you're stuck to Angular 5.2. You cannot migrate further. Automatically, you cannot use the latest features from the framework. The framework has its own architecture and its own specific component structure, a structure that is a bit rigid. It fits simple functionality, but as you try to implement more complex functionality, the framework is more in the way than helpful. If you remove the framework, in my opinion, you reach a cleaner code base. It's easier to maintain the code base. It's easier to add onto it. Directly from this, it's easier to onboard the members in the project. But it's also easier because you will, after removing the framework, you will have a more standard Angular project structure rather than the really specific one imposed by the framework. I also think it's easier to implement complex features if you remove the framework, especially if you also opt to migrate your Angular version. You will be able to leverage new Angular features, but also other external dependencies that might now be available. Okay, the plan for migration starts with easy step. First, to stop using the framework. We will get a bit into that. Then we need to refactor the code base to remove the Kendo UI Builder specific code. At this point, we hope to reach a stable and functioning Angular 5.2 project that is not dependent on the framework at all. Afterwards, we can upgrade the Angular version as far as we want. If we do this, we then can make use of new features where possible. We can stop, for example, after refactoring. In my opinion, that has value on its own. So you don't need to do all these steps or all this plan from one go. If you still have active development on the project, you can even continue development within these phases. What does stop using the framework entails? What does it imply for you? First, you will have to modify the code directly. So you won't have you don't have any more generated code and custom code. You need to modify directly the code base. You won't have the Kendo UI Builder interface at disposal, so you will have to start your development server on your own from a terminal using ngserve. You won't have the build button, so you will have to execute the ng build command. You won't be able to create a new component, for example, from the interface. You will need to use the nggenerate command. The biggest worry that you might have is that you don't have the knowledge for this. For the standard Kendo UI Builder actions, the knowledge of the CLI is not great. You can gain it easily and fast, in my opinion, by just using online resources, documentation, tutorials, and so on. Refactoring the existing code base that you have for a Kendo UI Builder project. We will also look a bit at Kendo UI Builder project codebase in an IDE soon. Kendo UI Builder has a special artifacts folder. These are resources that are merged into the Angular files at code generation, and that are not needed once you don't use the framework anymore. You will have to refactor all components generated by the framework from the Kendo UI structure into a standard Angular structure. We will see soon what that means. You will also have to refactor NgModule declarations. Kendo UI Builder also uses a custom component with the selector kuib custom HTML, which is used to separate generated code from the code that the developer writes himself. Since all code is now under your supervision and under your responsibility, this component is also not needed anymore and can be removed. There might be also entire classes or components that you don't actually use, but the code generator generates anyway. This can also be removed. At the end, we can also improve the folder structure a bit. I have here a project built with Kendo UI Builder. It is the small planning application at the point in time when it was still using the framework. And we can see here one of the mentioned things that needs to be refactored. The entire artifacts folder has resources that are only used by the code generator. They are not used at build time or at runtime by Angular. They are just places of customization for the developer, and they are actually pushed in the real Angular files at the code generation step in Kendo UI Builder. Since we don't use that anymore, all these resources can be removed. It's the same for Angular CLI JSON, the same for translations. So all of the contents of the artifacts folder can be removed. Let's look a bit into a component structure and how Kendo UI Builder generates the code for a component and how and what we need to refactor. So all components are generated with two classes: a base component, which actually has the add component annotation, and that contains the standard code generated by the framework, and a point of customization for the developer, where the developer can write custom code. Since we are not using the generator anymore, we can just merge these two classes together. So the contents of the base component can be moved to the now child component. And of course, after you need to do a review, you might have created now some code duplication. If you have overridden methods, you can just remove the declaration in the base classes. You don't need it anymore. You can also now move the add component annotation into the child class, which will help you a lot in some scenarios. In the template, as mentioned, you don't need the component kuib custom HTML anymore, as it serves no purpose. The module declaration is also split into two files. Almost all resources follow this pattern, that they are split into two files: a file generated by the framework, and a file where the user can, the developer can add customization. You can also see them marked with appropriate comments. Again, here we need to do the same thing. There's no need to split the declaration and import of resources into two files. You can just remove the config file and move all its contents to the module file and directly declare the ngModule. At the end, I hope to also get to show the Refactor project and how it looks. If you're done with all these steps, you can also, all Kendo UI builder projects have the folder structure of app, src app. This is again to separate resources. This structure, in my opinion, is not needed anymore. If you get to this point in the refactoring, you can just get rid of this app folder, move the src folder one level up, as it's not needed anymore. At this point, if you do all of this, you should have a working Angular 5.2 project that is not dependent on the framework anymore. It is highly suggested, or I suggest to test, deploy, and test the application at this point to make sure you did not break anything in the refactoring. You can now move into upgrading the Angular version. Some of the versions have a strong dependency on a Node.js version. What I find is that it's better to just update Node.js first to one of the latest versions, and then the updates should work okay from this point of view. Then you should use the tool offered by Angular, which can be found on Update Angular IO, that guides you through each update. Let's open it a bit. So on this web page, you can select one version, one source version, and one target version to migrate. It is strongly suggested by Angular, and I also suggested to not migrate directly from 5 to 10 or 12 or whatever. To do it 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8, and so on. If you do it 5 to a really late version, you will get a lot of errors. Build time, runtime, you will have a hard time debugging them if you are not really experienced in doing Angular updates. I would suggest to do it version to version. All updates are split in 3 phases: things that you need to do before updating, during the update, and after the update. There are particular things that you need to do for each update. I will not go through all of them, but I will cover some of them that I found more hard to execute. But all of them will have at their core an update of the Angular CLI and an update of the Angular core. What you will find is that not all dependencies are updated automatically or are updated correctly. You will also find that some dependencies simply don't have a proper version for Angular 9 or Angular 11, but usually Angular 9. In most cases, you should check the npm packages. You should, because most maintainers have moved to a new library name and a new address for their library. So most maintainers for popular and semi-popular packages have the continued maintenance of their packages. They might just be named differently. And you will need to do some manual fixes that we will cover next. So not everything might work from Angular CLI commands. Some of the hardest or the most important things that you need to have in mind during the updates. With Angular 6, Angular introduced a new name for the configuration file. So now it's not Angular CLI anymore, but Angular.json, and the structure has changed a bit. And you will have to convert your configuration file to this new structure. Angular 6 also comes with a major update to RxJS. you will find on the Angular helper page details on how to migrate your RxJS dependencies. There are several paths you can take to realize this, which are all documented pretty well. There's also a script that can help you to migrate the RxJS dependency. There's also a compatibility package that can be used, but it's up to you what path you choose. It also depends a bit on the size of the project. You might just decide you will migrate to RxJS and not use the compatibility package, for example. As mentioned before, Angular 9 is also a special case. A new compiler has been shipped with Angular 9 and a rendering engine. This makes a lot of dependencies to not work after you migrate to Angular 9, and you might need to do some manual investigation. Okay, what should I do with this dependency? What is the equivalent of this dependency after Angular 9, and so on. With Angular 11, there's also a replacement of the TS-lint configuration with TS-lint, so you will need to migrate your linting configuration to this new format. If you've done all of the updates, you can now look forward to some of the features that were shipped with all the Angular upgrades. In the presentation, I will only highlight some of them that I found more interesting. You can check online for a complete list. The list is really long. But for in Angular 6, they introduced a better CLI. They introduced the CDK component development kit, which is heavily improved also in later versions. They introduced animation and performance improvements. In Angular 7, the CDK now has drag and drop and virtual scrolling support. So if you have already in a Kendo UI builder functionality, drag and drop functionality, for example, you probably needed to do it with an external dependency. Now you can consider dropping that external dependency and just use the Angular CDK for drag and drop. In Angular 9, the Ivy compiler and rendering engine was introduced, which improves bundle sizes, performance at runtime. In Angular 10, the build times were improved. Again, in Angular 12, with support for webpack 5, the build has been improved. You can see that almost all the updates bring something related to performance and builds, which is true. But what I found is that it is not a constant. So you cannot assume from the start that you will start the migration and know for sure what build size improvement will I reach. In our small project, I reached only something like 20% or even lower improvement of the build size. Angular claims that for some projects, the improvement of the build size can be up to 80%. So it depends on the code base, it depends on the dependencies, it depends on a lot of things, but you cannot know for sure what to expect regarding some of the improvements. Performance-wise at runtime, what I found is most of the improvements are not noticeable to the naked eye. But if you have components that are really heavy in functionality, that have animations, you do get, even with the naked eye, you see that, okay, it runs smoother. So you need to calibrate your expectations on what to expect on all of these improvements regarding performance. If you reach this step, you now have an Angular 12 or maybe 13 or 14, whatever, whenever you do the migration. You need to do another round of testing. You did a major refactoring of the project. And some of the problems are not visible at compile time and at build time. You'll only find them at runtime. So it's good to just retest all the flows, make sure that you didn't break anything when doing all these changes. You can now take advantage of new techniques, libraries. You basically have no limit now in what you can do with your project. If you have a really big code base and you were interested in implementing RxJS, but you couldn't do it because of the Kendo UI builder structure, now you can. If you want to move from CSS to SACSS, you can now do that. And whatever else you can think of. If you found before some really nice external libraries that you could use, but you couldn't because of the Angular version, now you can use them. So if you do this migration, you will achieve a better project structure. You will have a cleaner code base, a faster and smaller application, and you can easier build functionalities in the future, especially complex functionalities. Now, a small comparison in some points of the project with the code base initially and after the migration. So this is the old code base. We had a duplication for almost any type of resource in the project. So we had two Angular CLI sources. In the new project, we have one single file with a new name after Angular 6, angular.json. In the old project, we had two package.json files. In the new project, we have one single package.json file with all the dependencies, scripts, and so on. On the component level, we saw before the Kendo UI builder component structure with the base component and all the classes. In the new version, it is a more simple structure. I would say the common structure of an Angular component with one file for each resource. And template-wise, the use of KB custom HTML that needed to be used in the Kendo UI builder project is now gone. We don't need it anymore. You can also see the folder structure does not use anymore the double app folder. This was the presentation. If there are any questions.
Yes, I had a look in the chat. So give me 1 second. There it is. Are there cases where it's not worth to migrate your Kendo UI builder project?
I would make the decision to migrate an application built with this framework or not, depending first of all if there's still active development on the project. So if there's still development going on, features added, I would say yes to migrate. It will improve the robustness of the code base. It will improve the readability of the code base. I would hope, and I would say it decreases the number of bugs that you can have in the code base, and you get all the leverage of the new features. If it's an application that okay, it was built a few years ago, it works, and is deployed somewhere, there's no active development on it, I would say probably not. If you have the resources to refactor and retest just to get the performance improvements, then maybe still yes, but otherwise no.
Okay. We have one other question. Very short time for that, but however, what's the spended effort required for the migration?
So the effort is really dependent on the current project, how large it is, and special use cases that you might have. For what we did, which is, I would say, a small project, the time was 1 week for the refactoring alone. So 1 week for refactoring, removing the Kendo UI builder references and moving to Angular 11.
Okay. That was it. I would say thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you as well.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.